and welcome to SciFi MineCart. The film we're having a look at today is a 1950s sci-fi movie in which we see its cast of characters terrified by a horrific blob. But no, it's not the Blob. Cue title card. The Unknown is a 1956 sci-fi horror film which follows some soldiers, a small town, a scientist and a detective as they encounter a radiation-hungry and facial feature melting unknown blob-like entity. Now, retrospectively, you would be forgiven to completely count out this movie, as the title, The Unknown, sounds like any other B-grade sci-fi movie from the 50s, and indeed the premise of a small town, some soldiers, a scientist and a detective getting mixed up with an unknown entity doesn't seem that exciting or stand out when it comes to B-grade sci-fi films, and especially when it comes to the monster itself. We've all seen an evil blob before. However, on closer inspection, The Unknown has quite a few elements that demand the film not be lumped in with your average 2-bit science fiction double feature. Firstly, the pedigree. This film is a Hammer film, and in fact one of Hammer's first horror films. And if you're a big fan of horror, and especially early horror, that's probably enough information to already inspire you to give this film a little bit more attention. If you're new to the genre, Hammer is the same film company that brought us 1957's The Curse of Frankenstein, 1958's Dracula, and 1959's The Mummy, so that puts The Unknown in pretty good stead. Now you might well object at this point, so what, Grim? If Shakespeare himself rose from the dead and wrote a crappy rip-off of The Blob, it's still a crappy rip-off of The Blob. Just because the film has good pedigree doesn't make it anything more than a 2-bit cheap rip-off. And you might well have a point in that argument, if not for the fact that this film actually came out 2 years before The Blob. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, 2 years before Steve McQueen encountered the molten meteor, it rose from the depths and terrorized in The Unknown. But all of that aside, undoubtedly the most important thing when considering the quality of a movie, namely, the quality of the actual movie itself, this film in this element too stands up rather strongly. Firstly, it's fantastically suspenseful. I went into the movie not knowing anything about it except for its title, and found myself constantly on the edge of my seat as the musical score built up to each tense encounter with the unknown. And I do say unknown rather purposefully, because the monster in the film is not revealed for a very long time. In fact, it's not until 54 minutes into the film's 88-minute long runtime that we actually see a glimpse of the creature. Now, some might say, and I myself might often tend to agree, that this is too long in a monster movie to reveal the actual monster. But in this case, the entire lead-up, the entire pacing, and the entire feel of the movie does such a good job to build up anticipation and really weave in the mystery that you're not exactly just sitting around waiting for the monster to appear. Having got into the film not even knowing that it was a monster movie, I was hanging on every single word of the investigation ran by Dr. Royston and Inspector McGill as they tried to figure out exactly what was causing the deaths. And yes, you heard me correctly. I said deaths as in plural, as in multiple deaths. And if you're the kind of sci-fi horror fan who enjoys some horrific gore, then this movie has got you covered. In the first encounter with the unknown, we don't know that there's actually an entity. It appears to just be some radiation burn, but then the following deaths actually allude to the fact that the unknown is some sort of creature. All of these encounters are shown off screen with the actual creature, as I said, not shown for a very long time. However, following the encounter with said creature, the actual deaths are usually shown in rather horrific and rather gory detail. If you don't like gore or horror, this is probably a pretty good time to look away. Not unlike many movies that come from this particular time period, this film comes ripe with fears that came along with the Cold War and especially the nuclear age. As such, The Unknown, the blob creature, is itself made up of and hungers for radioactive material. Which means, as you might well suspect, that the creature itself is radioactive, and which further means that anyone who is in close proximity to the creature when it's going after radioactive material, which is its main motivation in the film, are exposed to some rather horrific radiation burns. This is perhaps one of the most gory 1950s movies I've ever seen, but more importantly than that, it means that this film should probably be considered to actually be a body horror film. Now, I am admittedly not exactly very well versed in the genre of body horror, because I myself am not exactly that into the genre. You can only see so many people melt before it puts you off of your tea. However, if the reputable source Wikipedia is anything to go by, the earliest 2 films to be listed in the body horror genre are the 1958 The Blob and the 1958 The Fly, which I once more hurry to point out are both predated by the 1956 The Unknown. That's right, folks, yet another thing that this film deserves recognition for. Now, if you've managed to glimpse through your fingers and seen some of the horrific effects I've just been showing on the screen, you've probably noticed that they're actually done surprisingly and shockingly well. And that is in fact one of the many fantastic things about this movie. While it certainly is a very character-driven and story-driven film, which is actually okay because the story itself is interesting and the characters themselves are well acted and rather likeable, when it does bring out the effects, it brings out the effects. From the very first scene in which we see the fissure in the ground open of which the monster would later appear, to the horrifically gory deaths, and indeed to the eventual actual monster itself, this film really does not stinge on the goods. And really, the last 25 minutes of the film, once the monster's been revealed to us, is an action-packed giant monster sci-fi horror film that can really go toe-to-toe with the best. Considering that for the lion's share of the movie they had taken such careful measures to avoid showing the monster to us at all, or even really avoided referring to what the monster looked like, I had assumed it was because they didn't really have the technology or the budget to really actually pull off the creature. However, regardless of whether or not budget was the actual reason it took so long to reveal the monster, the suspenseful build-up is more than paid off. If you spend an entire movie talking about how horrific a monster is, and then when we finally see it, that monster itself is not actually horrific, it really tarnishes the whole film. However, luckily in X the Unknown, this is not the case. The blob-like creature rolling its way through town and up and over walls is suitably horrific and brings an excellent end to an overall fantastic film. X the Unknown is an undoubtedly fantastic sci-fi horror film which really does deserve more attention. And while I have absolutely no idea if it is in fact the first time we've seen a horrific blob on camera, it's probably not, but it's the earliest one I can think of. If you are a fan of the Blob, X the Unknown is definitely worth checking out as an earlier example of such a kind of monster. It is an overall very well crafted sci-fi horror film which is well deserving of cult status. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I have been and still am Grim Grindle.